Are there hidden codes in the biblical text? Question that a lot of people are asking today. Many competent Bible teachers are writing books excited about the codes. Grant Jeffrey probably leads the pack and does an excellent job highlighting the positive side of all of this, and we'll cover some of that. There are others that are very well-known, competent apologists who feel that the codes are very dangerous, that this is a lot of nonsense. This is not a recent phenomenon, by the way. The Kabbalists, the various venerated rabbis of the past, have felt from the beginning that the Torah is not only describes the creation, but was the very template that God used to do the creation. They've had a very, very high and mystical view of the text from the beginning. But even in the 16th century, Rabbi Moses Cordovero made the remark, the secrets of the Torah are revealed in the skipping of letters. You'll find these kinds of quotes in a lot of the ancient Jewish literature. The Kabbalists, and that word means many different things to many different people. The Kabbalah is a form of Jewish mysticism that's occultic. But the term actually means received lore and is used several different ways. The Talmud uses it in the sense of oral traditions and lore passed on verbally. The term also refers to the writing of authority to give a rabbi the authority to conduct certain kinds of kosher practices. The term has many different meanings. It generally refers to the ancient scribes and some of the beliefs and views they held about the text. Many of their views were kept in secret because they were going through such severe persecution. As the centuries go by, one of the most fruitful times in Jewish literature was in the 12th and 13th and 14th centuries in Spain. Many places, but in Spain particularly. As you recall, it was in October of 1492 that any Jew left in Spain would be killed. That's why Columbus and his crew boarded before midnight of that deadline his vessels that head to the New World. There's a whole thing there you might find interesting to look into. But the point is, much of what the ancient rabbis learned were kept secret or encrypted or hidden. And the burden of current rabbis in Judaism is to try to rediscover what they believe those guys used to know. And so that's why some of these quotes are so highly venerated in Judaism today. There was a guy by the name of Weissmandel, about the time of the First World War. Well, at the age of 13, he was able to get his hands on a few of the ancient books by some of the ancient rabbis. He became fascinated with the Torah. And he was in the habit of copying them down 10 letters across on cards, in a standard practice in cryptography. And he started to study deeply the text itself in a cryptographic sense, what you and I would call a cryptographic sense. And he made a number of interesting discoveries. Let me just share one of them, and this goes back to the period between World War I and World War II. Weissmandel, by the way, was on a train to Auschwitz and was able to escape, and he spent his life trying to do just the same kind of thing that Schindler did, trying to buy freedom for Jews, and he was obviously absorbed with that. But he also did make some discoveries. Now, the word Torah, which is the law, in Hebrew is spelled with 4 letters. Now remember that Hebrew goes from right to left. All languages go towards Jerusalem. Did you know that? English, German, French, Spanish, Latin, everything west of Jerusalem goes from left to right. Languages that are east of Jerusalem, Hebrew, Aramaic, Sanskrit, Chinese, whatever, go from right to left. They all go towards Jerusalem. I don't know what you do with that piece of information, but I just thought I'd mention it. But when we're talking Hebrew, we're going from right to left. You got used to that. The word Torah in Hebrew is in four letters: a tau, a vav, a resh, and a he. I have transliterated it for us so we get comfortable with it to our Western way of thinking. T-O-R-H is a way of sort of transliterating the word Torah. What's interesting, if you go to the book of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim, if you go to the first tau, or T in effect, and you count 49 letters, take the next one, now the interval of 49 letters, the next one is a vav, okay, which is sort of like an O. And then you count another 49 letters, you come to a resh, and another 49 letters, and you come to a he. So here's the name Torah spelled out in what you could consider a Cardano grill of 49-letter intervals. Okay? Say, that's kind of curious. By the way, I have no idea what else he did with his time, to find these kinds of things. But you look at this and you say, well, gee, that's curious. That could have been just accident of circumstance. Yes, except if you go to the book of Exodus, same thing happens. You go to the first Tau and count 49 letters. You come to a Vav. You count 49 letters. You come to a Resh. Count 49 letters. And you come to a He. The T-O-R-H equivalents, or Torah. Again, it's spelled with the same intervals. Well, you quickly come to the conclusion that can't be totally by chance, on the one hand. On the other hand, try sometime conducting a story, writing a story that will fit that kind of model. It ain't easy, okay? Try it sometime. But we're not through. If you try this on Leviticus, it doesn't work. But if you go to Numbers, it does work if you spell Torah backwards. Now, why would somebody bother is one of your questions, right? But it works. It happens. You go to the first He, and you count 49 letters, you get to the Resh, you count 49 letters, you get to the Vav, and you get 49 letters, you get to the T. In other words, it's as if you spelled Torah backwards. Okay? Again, 49-letter intervals. Go to the book of Deuteronomy, the same equivalent thing happens. We're dealing here with 49-letter intervals, which of course is 7 squared, 7 times 7. 49-letter intervals. Genesis goes forward, Exodus it goes forward, Numbers goes backwards, Deuteronomy goes backwards. Let's take a little closer look at Leviticus. 49 doesn't seem to work, but the number 7 does. If you take intervals of 7, you get a Yot, a He, a Vav, and a He, which of course is the Yahweh, the unpronounceable, ineffable name of God. How interesting. That in itself is interesting. But let's put together what we know. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Exodus, we've got Torah spelled forwards. Exodus, we've got forward. Numbers, backwards. Deuteronomy, backwards. It seems that the Torah always points to the name of God. Do you see design here? Now, you got two views about this. One view is that this is just the accident of circumstance. It's just a statistical oddity. There are Bible teachers that take that position. This is just statistics, an artifact of the Hebrew language. And by the way, there are some peculiar things about the Hebrew language that favors this kind of thing. There are books being written that try to point out all the reasons why this is an artifact of the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language has great density. There's only 22 letters. There's no vowels. It's designed to be very dense, to make maximum use of the available bandwidth. My argument's the other way around. Maybe Hebrew lends itself to this in order to have the codes. Think about it. Let's move on. It's interesting that the Kabbalists and their textual traditions is what led to the cryptology that had its flowering in the Renaissance period. The Renaissance period developed the mechanical age of the cipher wheels and all the rest of it that led to Enigma, the Enigma machines of World War II, which in turn led to the wartime computer development, which led, interestingly enough, to the rediscovery of the codes. You see the loop close? I think that's interesting. The Torah codes, as they're called, really have their roots in Weissmandel, among others. A guy by the name of Daniel Michelson wrote the Codes in the Torah, an article in the Or HaTorah, which is a journal, in 1987. About 1982, actually, a group of very, very bright, world-class mathematicians started looking at what Weissmandel discovered and started applying that using a computer and started to make some discoveries. And these were first mentioned in 1987 in Michelson's article. But the big thing came from Doron Whitsom and Elihu Rips and Yoav Rosenberg when they wrote an article on equidistant letter sequences in the book of Genesis. Some years prior, they had published this in the Royal Statistical Journals in Britain. But what makes the Journal of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics so profound is it's a refereed journal. To get an article published there, it has to be reviewed by a group of peers. And there were 8 guys that are all world-class mathematicians that spent 6 years studying their article and finally could not find fault with it, so it was published. Then this whole thing got even more visibility when Dr. Jeffrey Satinover wrote an article, Divine Authorship, which essentially summarizes in a more popular journal called the Bible Review in 1995. So the big furor really starts publicly in 94, 95, 96 time period. One of the things that they first discovered, Whitson and Rips discovered, they had a computer search the Torah for the name Israel. And they decided to take, they looked at the first 10,000 words or letters in the Torah, and they examined all possible intervals, looking for equidistant letter sequences, up to 100, both plus and minus, in other words, forward or backward. And what they found in the first 10,000 letters of Genesis, using that interval things, that the name Israel only appeared twice in Genesis, in the encryption sense, once at an interval of 7, and once at the interval of 50. Now you can make the argument that the thing could just show up by chance, but what disturbed them were those particular intervals were probably not accidental. They're clustered together in Genesis chapter 1:31 to roughly about the end of chapter 1 of Genesis, in the very passage that is their Kiddush. Every Friday night over a glass of wine they say the Kiddush. It's based on this. It's related to the Sabbath. The 7, of course, speaks of the Sabbath. And so does the 50, because that speaks of the Jubilee year. The seven weeks of years plus 1, that makes the Jubilee year. So 7 and 50 to a Jew speak of the Sabbath. And here is Israel mentioned in both of those intervals. That caught their attention. Is that coincidence? Theoretically. In Genesis chapter 2, there's a passage starting about verse 29 of chapter 1, ending about verse 9 of chapter 2. The passage opens with, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, and to you it shall be for meat." It goes on. The passage this particular area closes then in verse 9 of chapter 2. "And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." Okay? Hidden behind that text are the 25 trees that appear in the Old Testament. And here they're listed. The tamarisk, the terebinth, the thicket, the citron, the acacia, and the intervals. The tamarisk shows in intervals of only 2 apart. Terebinth minus 2, in other words, the other direction. Anyway, acacia, almond, wheat, date palm, cedar. Wheat, by the way, is also a term somehow associated with the knowledge of good and evil by some. Cedar, the aloe, the grape, the boxhorn or bramble, acacia, pomegranate, gopherwood, thorn bush or crataegus. The olive, the pistachio nut, the hazel, the fig, the willow, the oak, the vine, the barley, the chestnut, and the poplar. The fact that these trees happen to show up in the Torah is not the point. Many people miss the point. You could argue that they show up just statistically. Any large body of text is bound to have what I call accidental encryptions hidden in it. That's not the point. Here are 25 trees clustered, first point, 2 issues. Clustered in the same area and linked to the relevant plain text. If I treat the scripture itself as the plain text, these are not irrelevant. These are the very clustered behind the very passage that deals with the trees. Follow me? So that catches your attention. Is this some big profound proof? No, but boy, it gets your attention. Let's move.